at the Geneva Graduate Institute and president of the CEPR. Professor Di Mauro, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Last year, Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta delivered their long-awaited verdict on the state of European competitiveness. And by abusing a joke that Jean-Claude Trichet used to tell repeatedly, if you had to summarize this in 2 words, no more than 2, it would be not good. If you want to take 3 sentences, then the already cited gap is prominent, the gap in productivity, in technology that has been opening, but also the financing identified and the investment savings gap identified as one of the issues in Europe, the energy price competitiveness, consequence of the Russian aggression, but with us for a while. And last but not least, the fragmentation in the single market, which has been quantified by the IMF staff of being somewhere in the area between 40 and 110 tariff equivalents within euro area countries. So an additional layer of this year is that we have the fear of global fragmentation, geopolitics, and for Europe, clearly a fear of being left not behind, but alone, and therefore the need and imperative to invest in defense. For a strong Europe and for a credible defense strategy, economic strength is an absolute prerequisite. It's no longer good to have, it is imperative. So how can we enhance Europe's growth? I have with me the privilege of a fantastic panel. And on my right-hand side, I start with you, Philippe. Philippe Aguillon is professor of the Collège de France, INSEAD, and LSE. I was going to get there. Let's put that first. He is the world-leading expert on growth, technology, innovation, and probably one of the most cited scholars ever. Prodomo, I also want to say that he has agreed to and will be very soon initiating to lead a research policy network on productivity, innovation, and the social model, together with Alexandra Roulet for CEPR. Lars Feld is a chair of economic policy and constitutional economics at the Albert Ludwig University of Freiburg, and he is the director of the Walter Eucken Institute. He has a very wide experience in advising governments, especially in Germany, and is therefore one of the most well-known experts on economic policy, in particular in Germany. We have about 30 minutes time for discussion between us, and then we will open to the audience. So my first question goes to Philippe. I'm giving you a magic wand, and you please give me your 2 main wishes for what you'd like to have see in the euro area if you had such a magic wand.
Yeah. So just a few words. So thanks so much for inviting me. So the kind of diagnostics is that between 1945 and the 90s, the EU per capita GDP was catching up with US per capita GDP, and as of the 90s, the gap has been widening up again between US per capita GDP and European per capita GDP. The thing is that during those years where we were catching up, it was a kind of imitation-led growth. We had to reconstitute our capital stock. The Marshall Plan helped. We had to catch up with the technological revolution introduced in the US in the 19th century, 1920, the electricity revolution, and that the education level in the EU helped. But then we exhausted the power of imitation, and we had to move towards innovation-based growth. And it's precisely at the time where you had the IT revolution in the US, and we were not able to fully take advantage of the IT revolution. Why? Because we don't have a proper ecosystem for frontier innovation. And then we get to the Draghi report. We don't have a true single market for goods and services. We don't have a proper financial ecosystem of innovation. And we don't have a sufficiently efficient public policy for innovation. Okay, so that's the big picture. And that's what Draghi, Letta, Bocconi report are all about. Okay, so at the EU level, things that I would try to do, for example, an obstacle to the single market are the gold plating practices. Each country adds its own regulation to overall regulation. There is a Mario's paper in the Financial Times a few months ago that said that the barriers within Europe are bigger than the Trump barriers towards Europe. So that we have to do something, and we can fight the gold plating. The second thing is to create, you know, an ecosystem, financial ecosystem, I mean, more securitization, more venture capital, more institutional investors. And Sweden tells us, and I'll get back to that, how you can, even without moving fully to a fully funded system of pensions, you can create institutional investors. So you need to have the financial ecosystem of innovation, and you need more targeted, unique public innovation policy that are targeted toward high-tech breakthrough innovation. And so far, we don't have the instruments in Europe that target that. So what I don't want to be too long, but things that you can do, fight gold plating practices. The Draghi report and others, you mentioned that we can be much stronger in fighting gold plating practices and the over-regulation by each member state. Then the other thing, I would push for le laboratoire d'excellence européen. In France, where usually most of the things we do in France don't work very well, but one good experience is the laboratoire d'excellence. When we created, that was Sarkozy, the LABEX, the laboratoire d'excellence, my friend Antonin Bergeau and other co-authors, Antonin was here last year, showed that the LABEX had a big impact on frontier innovation in industries that were geographically and technologically close to the LABEX. We should generalize the LABEX to European, and that's why I'm in favor of creating a ERC for labs, not just ERC for your individual grants, but extend the ERC for labs. Macron took the proposal on the 5th of May. And we don't have anything that are like the DARPA, like the Advanced Project Research Project. We have the European Innovation Council, but it's not a DARPA. You have the Bocconi report, to which Monica Schnitzer, myself, Jean Tirole, Daniel Gross, it's not at all a DARPA. We need to create in areas like health, defense, energy transition, the equivalent of DARPA, and we need to do that at European level. And I am in favor of a coalition of the willing approach. I think we should do it with those who want to do it. We should align on the max, not on the mean. And then, qui même me suivent, who want to do it with me, come with me. I think those are the kind of things that we should, that we could push.
Okay, thank you so much, Philippe. Magic wand over to you. 2 wishes.
Well, is it a time for wishes? Well, I share the diagnosis that Philippe was making, and I think we need to take into account the difficulties that the implementation of these ideas have in political environments. So there is this nice word by Moritz Scholarik saying it is improbable that governments find the winners of tomorrow, but there's a high chance that the losers of yesterday find the government. And this is one of the problems we have to face. So what Philippe was just saying is very open to what we call horizontal industrial policy. Creating environments, creating frameworks that allow innovation in several different areas without knowing what is the next area that is important for innovation and therefore also for productivity gains and growth. But as soon as we are concentrating on particular firms and industries, it's becoming difficult. And therefore, one of my wishes is that we are returning to this broader perspective in creating innovative environments, instead of thinking that we know as governments, as the state, what will be the technology that has to be chosen. There's one exception, and Philippe also mentioned this is defense. Just because in the case of defense, you are interested in the fact that the cutting edge technology that you develop cannot be used by someone else. And therefore, DARPA and the interaction that we have between the military-industrial complex in the US and the innovators that you find is successful. Yeah? Although they also wasted some money, but they are more or less successful in that regard. And the idea here is that the government, the state as the sole demander, a kind of monopsonist, a monopolist on the demand side, is having an influence on the outcome. But there must be this kind of monopolist in the defense area, and this is different. And when you're extending this idea, it also has implications for regulation. It has implications for competition policy. Regarding competition policy, I would not say it is the creation of European champions. It is rather the possibility to have the spin-off from the research side, from universities, from research centers, to industry that should be allowed to a larger extent than we currently have.
Okay.
Can I add a word? I mean, I just want to, I know it's not, in fact, the problem with Europe, I mean, the problem with Europe is that it has been very much, we are very much perceived as a regulatory giant and a budgetary dwarf. Maybe it's wrong. I mean, for example, the Maastricht Treaty, I am in favor of Maastricht and the 3%, but we used to put on the same footing dépenses de fonctionnement and investments. You see, we need to put on the deficit due to pension system not working well and investment in. We should not put both on the same footing. I think we should not treat the same way spending to just, fill up deficits. In France, we have a pension system in deficit, so one thing, but another thing is to invest in growth. So that has to be changed, which cannot put all spending on the same footing. Second thing, we have competition policy, but we use pretext of the competition policy to preclude any form of sectoral state aid. We have to admit the idea that you can do industrial policy, which is pro-competition. That's exactly what ARPA does. ARPA, the money comes from the ministries, they have team leaders, and then they elicit competing projects. So there is a way to do industrial policy, which is pro-competition. And I think that we need, so it's not that we should have to change the doctrine, but we have to implement those things differently if we want to really wake up and become a pro-innovation space. Yeah.
You have already answered partly what I was going to ask you, but only partly, because my question was going to be twofold. On the one hand side, we do need to mobilize public funds for financing the commons, to which R&D presumably belongs. On the other hand, we need private, mobilizing more private investment. So
my view on this, first we have the resilience funds from COVID. I think it was, maybe I will say something very stupid, wasn't it around the order of more than 600 billion euros? We spent half of it. Alors, it's a resilience facility. Yeah? Alors, France, of course, spent already everything. So that's the problem. So it's very difficult to answer the kind of question. You are French because they say, okay, again, the French said that you can spend, but other countries can and we can still spend the interest on this. So we have the resilience funds. Okay, we can do a lot with them. So I think, and to go defense, of course, but defense, we will get back to that. Defense in a broad sense. Defense is not just to build ammunition. It's also AI, it's also technology, but we will get back to that, okay? But then I think that on the financial ecosystem, I mentioned before, venture capital, we can have much more. Institutional investors, of course, we have pension systems which are very much repartition, pay as you go, not fully funded. That makes it hard to have institutional investors. But Sweden is a very interesting, we had our Swedish, where is our Swedish friend? You are there, you know that very well. You have the pension premium system. Okay, 2.5% of taxable income of the Swedes is automatically allocated to a pension fund, and they can choose the investment, and that favors IPOs. Sweden is doing much more IPOs than everybody else in Europe. And you also have, you can invest in small and medium-sized enterprises through saving accounts which are fiscally advantageous. For example, you have the investeringskonton. Is that what you call the ISK? We should emulate that. When I don't even think everything, I'm very pro-Sweden. My friend is in Sweden and all that. But, but that's the thing. I would criticize education reform in Sweden lately, but that on institutional investment is very good. We should emulate what Sweden is doing on institutional investors. And bank securitization, I don't want you to between, what we did that led to the global financial crisis, which was maybe too much, and maybe too restrictive approach we have to it in Europe, there might be a middle ground. Maybe we can allow for a little bit more of bank securitization. And I think we have ways that, so I think public-private effort, but that would, and I think those are some levers, the pistes to maybe, move in the direction of a more friendly financial ecosystem for innovation.
We are going to get back to defense in a moment, as you said already. But before that, Lars, I wanted to turn to you on energy costs. One of the pain points is higher industrial energy prices in Europe. And the prediction is that this will remain for quite a while until the renewables are sufficiently built out, and the gap, again with the US in this case, is going to diminish. In the meantime, and the EU has just opened the door for that, we have the not only discussion, but also the implementation of subsidies or other schemes to lower energy prices for energy-intensive industry. I think it is important to also mention that this opening of the door from the EU side framework is temporary and is coupled with the build out of renewables. Now, to you, the question, is this a good idea? Are we going to become more competitive or less competitive by having this temporary subsidy to energy prices?
Well, I'm skeptical of it because I fear that it will not remain temporary. The pressure to introduce something like this, in particular coming from Germany, is strong from the energy-intensive firms. And when you look at them more carefully, you realize that what they are exposed to, meanwhile, is the higher carbon prices they face. And there is the interaction with climate change. So when we have an efficient instrument to cope with climate change, it is carbon pricing, in particular because it allows the international coordination much more than any other instrument can do. Subsidies have difficulties to allow for this coordination, and well, the pure legal regulatory part is also not doing this. With the subsidies for the for the energy-intensive firms that are now allowed by the EU, you are also endangering the climate change policies that are important. So I'm critical of this. I fear that we are discussing the energy market problems that we have on the one side, we are too strongly in a national way. When I think about the electricity market and look at this,
it is a particular problem in Germany, right?
Yeah, but it is particularly a German problem. That's what I mean.
Okay.
It's larger, to a larger extent, a German problem than a French problem, for example.
Yes.
Yeah, or even an Italian problem. Although there's also no nuclear energy in Italy, but at least Italy has cheaper gas that it can get and cheaper oil that it could get from Tunisia and so on. So there is the possibility. The possibilities are different, and what Germany has done in the last, well, decades, I would say, or at least the latest decade, it has isolated itself in its energy market more and more. And this is one of the possibilities that we should use, and this is also bringing us to the questions of completion of the internal market. If we had an internal energy market, it would help us in several respects. And therefore, I'm critical of the subsidization. I'm much more in favor of completing the internal market in that regard. But I'm also happy that Philip mentioned Sweden as this shining example. I would generalize this to the extent that we have a larger role of fully funded systems in our pension systems. The national capital markets work better. So it's not only a question of capital markets union, also each member state can do something by increasing the fully funded part of their pension systems. So the second pillar, third pillar ideas that we already had in the past, not only the enhancement that Sweden has for its first pillar. So these are the ideas you could follow in order to have better possibilities there.
Energy, can I say something? I don't want to...
Sure.
In fact, in Europe, we had very much the carbon tax approach, okay, carbon pricing. And I believe very much in the virtue of carbon price. In the US or elsewhere, there was more the industrial policy, IRA. Well, I'm not a fan. I believe we need both. The Blanchard-Tirole report 5 years ago, I pushed very much with Nick Stern, saying, don't do only carbon tax. You cannot do only the stick. You need the stick and the carrot. We had the yellow vest movement in France because we increased the price of even gas oil, but people didn't have alternatives. They didn't have trams. They didn't have S-Bahns. They didn't have, so there was the only way. So there is no way you can succeed without having both the carbon pricing, which is the stick if you don't, but you need to create the alternatives. And the alternative is green innovation. We won't get out of it without green innovation. Innovation to mitigate, to slow down the global warming, new source of energy, using less energy, the adaptation innovation, the dikes, the air conditioning system, and the amelioration. There are people who work on how to cool the air. I know people, when I say that, people, the whole physics department of Harvard works on that, geoengineering. We need the green innovation, and we need to push. That's why we need the green DARPA, okay, with green ARPA. So I think you need the two legs. We will give you alternatives. If you don't use them, then we have the carbon price. But just imposing the carbon price is to have punishment energy. People don't want that. You need to provide alternatives. You need the two legs, carbon price and green industrial policy. And we need both. Having only carbon price will not get you there, I can tell you. Yeah.
Well,
you need both.
I'm a bit more critical of this. As long as this is pure innovation, it's fine. But as soon as we are subsidizing old industries to a larger extent, and we don't even know what the new technologies are bringing them. Well, when I think about the steel industry in Germany, for example, it will not work in that way. Yeah. So we are trying to compensate them for the adaptation they need to accomplish. And I think it will lead us nowhere. If it is really a technological advance in the pure sense, it's a different thing.
No, but you direct the technical change. You can direct it. Yeah.
And which is why it is important to mention that it is a temporary measure coupled.
Yeah.
Conditional, in fact,
yeah.
on renewables build-out.
Well, I realized so many temporary measures in the past that became permanent. So I'm
like taxes, yeah.
Taxes, for example, all those tax subsidies.
It's good. There is a debate. That's good. That's good. That's what we want. Yeah, excellent. Okay,
Philippe, the opportunity to talk about the opportunity of defense, and let me say something.
Yeah, we talk about defense. Yes. Exactly.
So just a word on this, because I mean the approach is now to agree on the number 3.5 to 5, and of course that is not the way that you would typically do something if you wanted to do it most efficient way. You don't say I'm going to spend X and how much do I get for that. So the question is, how do we do this effectively? How do we make it in such a way that it creates spillovers also to the civilian and to growth?
Yeah, so I think it's good. I mean, there is a good effect of Trump. It wakes us up. Voilà. That we realize that Europe cannot do business as usual, sheltered forever under the American umbrella. We need to wake up, okay? And I'm very happy that Germany broke its dogma of budgetary balance, advocate massive investment, including in defense. I'm happy that the European Commission has agreed to exclude defense from Maastricht's 3%. Britain is re-engaging with Europe. What's fantastic to have Starmer with us. Voilà, offering to contribute its defense capability. That's all great. But these developments, you see, we have to be aware of some possible mistakes, okay? One mistake would be to sacrifice fundamental research by exclusively prioritizing defense or adopting an overly narrow view of it, okay? China has become a primary concern for the US, mainly because of its impressive, spectacular technological advancement. So we need to have a broad view of what we call defense. AI is part of defense. Many things are part of defense. It cannot just be, we will build ammunition. That would be very backward. So we need to have a view of defense, which is broad. Voilà, that's the first thing, not be narrow, but go into technology and technological catch-up. Second thing would be to revert to outdated Colbertist. I love Colbert, okay? I'm a big admirer of Colbert. But we have the word Colbertist style industrial policy, where governments vertically and discretionarily allocate public funds to particular firms that they select as national champions. As I said, we lack institutions like the ARPAs, which is the way to avoid the champions. So we have to say there is a domain which is important, but we have the top-down part, money comes from it, but then we let the team leaders elicit competing projects. This should have to be pro-entry, pro-competition, and we should avoid the pitfalls of a too top-down Colbertist approach. And particularly beware that in the European industry, especially in defense, suffer from a lack of competition, and therefore they fail to innovate sufficiently at the technological frontier. We have to insuffler de la concurrence. Yeah. I think it's very important.
Now, you didn't mention European common procurement or European common funding.
Yeah, but that would be part of the funding. That would be part of the resilience could be used, but we should use them in a way which is very DARPA-minded and with public-private. Right. You see, when we build railways in France or in Italy or everywhere, it was a private-public, to go to Marseille, c'était le PLM. To go to the West, c'était les frères Perrer. It was a public-private collaboration. And energy on the one hand or defense on the other. Again, we should have a public-private partnership. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Do you want to add anything?
Yes.
Especially in view of the big German, budget for defense?
Yeah, well, I have to add, in particular, when I heard this name Colbert.
No, but I love Colbert. He's a great guy. I mean,
yeah, you love it. This is no surprise to me.
But I would not emulate. I would not redo this.
So it's interesting to say instead of a top-down Colbertism, we needed a bottom-up Colbertism. I don't know what a bottom-up Colbertism is.
No. That's why I say don't do Colbert.
Don't. Yeah, well.
This is the man who did Schumpeter, right?
Yeah, no. I know pretty well. You don't have to explain to me. I read this book up and again. Okay. Yeah, well, but being careful of this, channeling these funds that we now have in Germany. So it's actually an exception from the fiscal rules, not only in Europe, which is only temporary, but overall in Germany, which is not restricted in time. So it can go on forever. And every defense spending above of 1% of GDP is not under the restrictions that we usually add. And this allows us to channel the funds more clearly into production that is innovative. I fear at the moment that in order to spend as much as they can in the beginning, they will be backward oriented. Yeah? So buy ammunition, of course we need ammunition. We are not having that much at the moment. We need tanks, we need ships and so on. But it is much, much more important to consider, first of all, and then to realize that we have to look forward.
Yeah, of course.
And also think about the possibility to establish the systems on which we currently totally depend on the US. Think about satellites, for example. This is one possibilities that we could expand to a larger extent than we currently have.
At the European level?
Well, it could be done at the European level. At least it should be done in coordination at the European level between us. I should mention one point here, given that Germany is now going forward with this large defense spending. The last 80 years after the Second World War were also a period in which the European allies as the Americans were eager to restrict Germany to a larger extent, not to become that powerful in defense anymore. So it's also important regarding the interdependence in the structures that we have, that we are cooperating from the start in order to ensure that no tensions are arising. And therefore, the German-French collaboration is very, very important in that regard. Yeah, it's very important.
Yeah.
I'm sitting as a Swiss in the middle, Swiss and Italian.
No, I'm not great. No, the Swiss are great.
So I want to open to the floor almost immediately. So let me just ask you one last question from my side. And the answer should be, please, short and basically one sentence, maximal 1 comma. Fast forward 10 years from now, let me offer 2 scenarios. One is the EU uses this momentum and this pressure at the moment and succeeds. We have 10 years from now a much more integrated, stronger EU, well on the way of also integrating further countries, and we have a credible defense and strong growth. And the alternative scenario, you put a no in front of all of those. So which scenario? No,
Yeah.
I ask you first because you're the optimist. Which scenario do you go for?
I'm usually in the middle. At least I hope that we are sufficiently able to restrict the current geopolitical tensions that are present in order to ensure that there is no direct conflict between the large powers. If this is the case and we go through this successfully, I hope that we are going to get, less restrictions in trade, realize or profit possibilities or business possibilities in the world.
In the world or in the EU?
Not only in the EU, but also in the world.
But a stronger EU.
Yeah, well, you have to have a stronger internal market anyway in order to increase productivity. We have many, many restrictions. Think about services, think about the financing side. So there's a lot to do in that regard. And this is not only the gold plating, it's also the regulation that is coming from the EU.
Sorry, I didn't want to.
Yeah, well.
Just wanted you to be on the one pessimist, optimist spectrum.
And on me, my view, I will tell you, I'm a fighting optimist. I'm thinking as long as there are things you can do, you can be optimist. I think you become really pessimist when there is nothing you can do. And when I see Germany becoming an investing country again, when I see UK getting back to us, when I see Canada, we are very close to Canada. Canada is not in Europe, but we are very close. I mean, we share very much the same values. And I see all these scientists in the US, they are very unhappy. Because the scientists, they want three things. The soft power. Now we are the stronghold. We have the soft power. And what are the big values that European represents? We are the hallmark of those. Freedom and democracy. It's us now. Now there is no more. You know, I had a colleague in the US. He got a prize, a nomination for a prize in France. And he was being interviewed by Le Monde. And he didn't dare to give his answers, Britain. He was afraid, Adrien B. And he gave them by orally because he was scared. People are scared now in the US to speak. Now, the only place in the world, Canada, of course, is with us, but the only place where you are free and democratic, it's Europe. Number two, protection and inclusiveness. We have a social model. Okay, we can reconcile innovation and inclusion. I mean, we know, and that's what we want. We want to become more innovative, but by also improving our social model. And the third thing, we have a true commitment to fighting climate change. And I think that will make us very attractive. You know, when you're a researcher, you don't want to earn billions. You want to be able to earn correctly, but you want to have good schools for your children, good health system, and be in a country where you can freely speak without being arrested, without having your phone, you know, scrutinized, without knowing whether your students will get a grant or will not get a grant, will get a visa or will not get a visa. And you worry about climate. You want to know also which climate your children will be. That place is Europe. So we have this place. We have good, fantastic mathematicians, engineers. It's up to us to do it. We can do it. And I'm very optimistic.
So how can we top that? Well, audience, up to you. Who would like to? Yes, to start.
Well, first of all, thanks for a fantastic discussion. I would like to talk a little bit about the productivity divergence between the United States and Europe, which has been widening in the last 25 years and likely will be exacerbated. We just came out, I'm from the OECD, we just came out with a paper on the impact of AI on productivity. And we do this for the G7, and we see that certainly countries like France, Italy, that were further behind on the impact of productivity and the diffusion of AI. So, you know, what does this mean? In particular, what Philippe was mentioning on the role of universities, this is absolutely true, but we also know that AI is a bit different in a way that there are some deep pockets in some of the conglomerates. There's a very nice book by one of the pioneers of AI, Fei-Fei Li, and she says very clearly that she was in Stanford and she was in Duke, and she went for a sabbatical in Google and said, listen, I never thought that we could have this type of research funding at our disposal and our resources. So perhaps, is there a change? So what I would like to ask, besides the divergence of productivity, is if, for example, one of these big conglomerates gets to AGI first than anybody else, will this mean that Europe is irrevocably behind in terms of AI?
So I don't. So on AI, I'm not a kind of top. I worked on an AI report for Macron last year with Anne Bouvreau, who organized the AI summit. There are, you know, AI now, it's data and computing power. There are areas where we have very good data. For example, on health in France, we have fantastic data. We need to build up computing power, and that's where there is a role for the state. That would increase competition. If we have local computing power, local data centers, and there is private-public investment, that will foster entry in competition. So there are areas where we can really develop AI, because there is all the application, and we have the data, and if we build computing power, and we have the engineers, and there are many researchers in AI, they would come to Europe if we give them good conditions. You see what I mean? Even Google employs researchers in Europe because they're happy in Europe. So all what I said before, if we have this laboratoire d'excellence and more money for research, but also we have the computing sector, the data center, computing sector. If we build the equivalent of CERN, you know CERN, if we have a CERN for AI, for example, we can do all those things. People will come because we are heaven. Europe is heaven, and they will come to work with us. If we make it easier to have you work part-time at Google, part-time public research in AI, we can attract Yann LeCun, who is a pillar of AI. He's a very good friend. He loves to come to France all the time, and he's not happy in the US anymore. If we create the minimum amount of attractiveness in Europe, LeCun will be with us. He already believes that LLM is behind us, that now you go beyond LLM. You have to bring all the Yann LeCun, and they will work on the next generation. So I think we are totally on the race.
Okay, thank you. So now I want to take a few questions. Please make them short, and then we go back to the panel. So Isabel was first, then climate, and yes.
And yes.
So I have first of all, thank you very much for a fantastic panel. It was really enjoyable listening to you, and thanks also for the optimism. So I have a question to Lars. So you used to say that common defense is the basis of the foundation of states. So my question to you is, would common defense be a first step towards the United States of Europe?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, can you have it on?
Hi, thank you so much for the great discussion. So I had a question about climate policy and industrial policy. So here, you were talking about that in the standard theoretical framework, you want to tax carbon to avoid fossil fuel, and then you also want to stimulate innovation by putting green subsidies. I tend to agree with you from the theoretical model. That's kind of the nice outcome. But then it kind of, I share some of the points that were shared before, like you're always looking back, like now, obviously, solar panel and windmill are very obviously what you should invest in, but then all those industrial policy. But then if you do that, maybe you're subsidizing a bunch of companies that may never invest and innovate and find the next innovation that could be useful for the environment. And so I was wondering if there's a way for both of you to reconcile what, looking to the future and trying to promote future innovation at the same time as being a bit more conservative and not, inducing misallocation and spending public spending on bad innovation, on bad technology. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adriana Kugler from the Federal Reserve Board. Thank you for the very dynamic panel. So I appreciated very much that you focus on innovation, access to capital, government spending or investments in spending. But I guess I was surprised that there was no mention to immigration. And there was no mention either to business dynamism and entrepreneurship. And I would say those have been two of the main sources of growth in the US and in productivity growth, in particular TFP, in the past few years. So I was wondering about your reactions to that, especially in light of the different reactions to immigration across Europe, with Brexit, with continental Europe also facing different reactions to immigration and backlash in different places.
Okay, great, thank you. Last, military.
Starting with Isabel. Well, actually, when you look at the history of the formation of federations, usually you find that the defense question stands in front of this development. Look at the US, you can look at Canada, Switzerland, Germany, these 4 of, say, 6 traditional federations have something like this. And therefore, defense is so important. But it is not simply buying weapons coordinated at the EU level. What you need to keep in mind is that they had common armies, and the willingness to give up sovereignty to the EU level in that regard, where you bring some of your citizens into danger being killed at the front, is a very difficult question to solve. And if it is solved, I would say it's the first step, the first clear step towards the United States of Europe. Yeah, and then regarding defense in general, you would say the proper way of financing it is if there is a sufficient amount of spending of defense at the federal level in the EU, then you need also have to have a kind of tax that is financing it. Yeah, it's not only indebtedness that will help. You need to have a proper EU tax and sufficiently relevant in order to finance these large amounts of defense. Let me make one remark in the direction of immigration, business dynamism, and so on. Particularly when you mentioned CERN, I remember visiting CERN this year and being informed about all the inventions that came from CERN and finally made it to the US and were used in order to create innovation in the US. So it's still this problem of translating the inventions that we have, the patents that are created in Europe, and translating it to the market and have the innovation there. And what we discussed in the beginning of this meeting, labor market regulation is one element, product market regulation is one element, but we never know how much preferences as a third variable influence this. And there is your business dynamism that you mentioned. So when children at school think, what is the next firm that I can found? What would be a nice startup in order to get some money? And the school children in the US start with it at the age of 14. In our case, the school children at the age of 14 think differently. They try to find out what would be the next good job in government. And that's a different thing. And so I think we need to do quite a lot in order to improve this environment and allow for the innovation. It's not simply that the government can trigger this. At some point, you must be sure that you are unleashing the innovators in order to give them the space to innovate.
You must be talking to different school children than I am, but who want to go and work for government.
So no, just answer the questions. I mean, on energy, I think you're right. I mean, that's what DARPA also allows. DARPA, you know, it's co-financing public-private. So if something doesn't work well, it's not refinanced. So that's one thing that DARPA enables precisely. It's to make sure you don't pick winners and you stick with the winners. That's one of the big things that DARPA does, okay? And that's where we have to move it. On the business dynamism, exactly what I mentioned, you need a single market. You need venture capital. You need, you know, I'll tell you, institutional investor. I spent 25 years in Boston as a student and then subsequently as a professor. I saw many consuls de France in Boston, you know, in a row. They would tell me my main job is to welcome French startups that cannot grow in France because they don't have the financing to grow. They don't have the venture capital, the social investment. So if we create this financial ecosystem, that's what will spur business dynamism. You have to create a climate where you can create a new firm, not be over-regulated also, because we are very good to over-regulate. So in AI, it's a big issue, by the way. We need regulations, but we tend to over-regulate, okay? And you need to have a framework that encourages startups and them to grow. You see what I mean? And that's business dynamism. I mean, that's absolutely key to the whole thing, okay? Migration, there are some people in France, I think for demagogical reason, they think we should have zero immigration. I think those people are disqualified to become ever president of France because, and I don't put name there, because you need immigration. You need, of course, skilled immigration. You need to pilot your immigration policy. But the idea that you should have zero immigration, it's totally absurd. If you go to a French hospital, by the way, and you didn't have the Romanian or other people, doctors, you would not be cured. It would be absurd. You need smart, and you need to renew, because we have a demographic problem. We tend to be aging. The big problem of Japan, why isn't Japan innovating? Because they're becoming older and they don't have migration. We don't want to become like Japan. We want to have an economy where we allow for smart migration. So migration, and more generally, it's like business dynamism. We need entry. We need entry of talents, good education system. We need good regulation, but not over-regulate, so that not to discourage new entrants. We need new blood. I mean, the success to growth, the key is to have all the time new talents, new firms, new blood coming in. Everything that blocks the new blood is bad.
So we are actually running out of time very quickly. So I have already allowed 2 more very short questions, please, and then 2 very short answers.
Marcin Kacperczyk, Imperial College. I have 2 comments. One is the story of financing. I mean, it sounds like, okay, finance is all that we are missing. I think we have to be a little bit careful.
No, that's not what we say. Yeah?
Well, I think kind of very targeted policies are very important. But maybe more important, I think the interesting question I have is, how should we align the timing of all of this? Some of these ideas, especially you mentioned, sound more like a medium to long-term kind of investments. I mean, revising the whole kind of educational system is not going to happen overnight, even if this brilliant economist or whoever else comes from the US. But the problems we are facing oftentimes are very short-term. Think of like climate change. I don't think we have that time kind of luxury we had with iPhone, that it took like iteration to design the product that is finally really good and we can use. We need solutions which are basically now and very soon, rather than the solutions that are going to arrive 10, 20, 30 years later. So are there any kind of changes we need to adopt? Because some of these things may simply misalign with what the objectives are in terms of timing when they need to happen.
Okay, urgency and
very quickly.
Very quickly afterwards.
Yeah.
Thanks. I'll try to be short. It's a follow-up to Isabel's questions. We tried actually in Europe to start with defense, and the European defense community was essentially voted down by the French Parliament in '54. So my question is for Lars. I mean, do you think that we can achieve a single market for defense if we don't have joint procurement? Because that would tend, according to political economy literature, to keep vested interests that are fragmented along national lines.
Okay, Philippe, you're...
No, my response quickly is that you have to start everything at once. Some of the thing will yield short-term return, but the long-term you have to start right away. Also because people anticipate, very often long-term policies their effects are anticipated, and so you get already gains. But the gold plating that you have to act, creating a European laboratoire d'excellence, that's something that can be done quickly. Having some countries in Europe get together, create a DARPA or create joint projects, that can be done very quickly. And education, of course, takes longer, but you have to start right away. So you start various things. Some of them gives you a return sooner, but you should not delay those things that you think will take longer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Last defense.
2 short answers. I think it would be a very important precondition to have joint procurement in order to come up with a defense union. I know how difficult the political economics behind it is and how strong currently these special interests that come from particular firms are. But given the fact that we need to have a quick rearmament and that some of those firms are already producing at their capacity constraints, having difficulties to expand capacity, I think we could do much, much more by cooperating, despite everything that might hinder this. And this is also going in the other direction to the other question. When you are doing this properly from the start, you are somehow managing expectations, and this has an effect.
Thank you. Thank you to both of you, Franco-German excellence and efficiency. We have exhausted our time. Thank you to everybody. A big applause for our panelists.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for what I think Governor Kugler very aptly described as a dynamic panel. I feel as though you guys really did your bit to close the productivity gap over the past 45 minutes. We now come to the final part of our program, the presentation of the award for the best paper from one of the world's most promising young economists. The winner has been selected by an expert jury and also taking into account your votes. It's now my pleasure to hand over to ECB President Christine Lagarde.
Okay, I can do without it. So good afternoon to all of you. And it is really my pleasure today, just like last year, to convene the finalist of this award. And we are every year reminded how important it is to listen to these young, talented people, not just because they are our retirement program. We heard a bit about aging, yeah? On this occasion of their presentation, but also because they are the future of our profession. And amongst them, I'm sure that there will be future governors, policymakers, academics, or whatever they care to choose, because they have so much talent. So I had a chance, as I'm sure you all did, to walk around and talk to some of them and have a look at their posters. And I'm sure that some of you will be reading their papers. But being here is already for all of them an impressive challenge and an impressive achievement. I'm looking at all of you there. You are in this corner of the room, because there were over 80 applicants this year. So for the 10 of you to be in this room, to have shared those few days of debates and those social moments, I know some of you enjoyed the dinner last night, and I'm glad that you were with us, is really an achievement. You are the winners, all 10 of you. Your papers really underpin the theme of this year's forum and the macroeconomic shifts that we continue to observe in our work as policymakers. Over the past few days, a selection committee has been very busy reading, evaluating your papers. They reviewed their academic quality and policy relevance, and also took into account the votes of the participants through an online voting portal. Thank you to those of you who have participated in that vote. So let me first of all, before I call you up to the stage so that you can receive your diploma, so to speak, let me first of all thank those who spent time reading and evaluating your paper. They were the selection committee members, so Jordi Galli, Hélène Ray, Philip Hartzman, Isabel van Sinkist, and Francesca Zucchi. Please stand up to be recognized by this room. Thank you much. I would like to now ask you to come to the stage to receive your diploma. We're going to proceed a little bit differently from last year. So each of you will receive his award, not the final award, but there's award, and there will be a photo opportunity. You'll have to move swiftly because the 10 of you will go through this exercise, and the audience is very keen to get out and do something else. So who do I announce? So Thomas, I have to stay here because otherwise nobody hear me. So Thomas Bourani, here you are, adapting to change, macroeconomic shifts and policy responses. And I think you win the prize of having said hello to as many people as you did in the last 24 hours. Thumb up.
Thank you very much.
And now I call to the stage Leonardo D'Amico, one of the many Italian elegant beneficiaries. So your theme was adapting to change, macroeconomic shifts and policy responses. Thank you so much. I'm now calling to the stage Frédéric Fournet, Adapting to Change. That's okay. Yeah, no, you stay close to me. Adapting to Change, Macroeconomic Shifts and Policy Responses. I saw many, many people at your booth over there listening and trying to understand the great work that you've done. So now with Adapting to Change, Macroeconomic Shifts and Policy Responses, Marco Irisari. Thank you so much. So Patricia Massner, Adapting to Change, Macroeconomic Shifts and Policy Responses. Bravo. There is a problem here. Because this one is also Adapting to Change, Macroeconomic Shifts and Policy Responses. This is not that. Yeah, Lavisa Reiche. And I know this is not it, because you are the one who focused specifically on how gender differences actually matter when it comes to inflation expectations. So the title is wrong, but the study is great. All right, Giovanni Ciacovelli. What am I doing? Yeah, okay. So now I call to the stage Jacob Marot Sondran. Congratulations. Okay. Now Giovanni Trebi. Last one, Alena Wabic. There you go. So it's now for me time to announce the winner of this year's Young Economist Prize, who will receive 10,000 euros and the trophy that will be presented in a microsecond to me. Thank you, come over, because I have to hand it over to the winner, who is Alena Wabic.
As Madame Lagarde already said, I'm sure you're all happy to leave, so I'm going to keep it short. Thank you so much. I'm deeply honored, especially because we've seen so many excellent projects the last few days. So I think we can all be proud. And thank you so much for letting us share our work.
Bravo. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. You can stay here, enjoy the moment, because, you know, seeing all these very, very bright policymakers, professors, researchers of all walks of life from where you are is a moment. So keep it, stay here. So we are now coming to a close, and I owe it to my great team to have quickly summarized what we have done over the last 2 days. And I thought I would remind you briefly. It's going to be short, I promise. So we started Tuesday with a paper on Eurosclerosis in the labor market that was shared by the Vice President. And the paper questioned whether overregulated and rigid EU labor markets are contributing to low euro area productivity. And not all of you in the audience actually agreed with those conclusions. The second paper caught the attention of the media in the room by suggesting that central banks should look at discretionary spending as well as headline inflation, not to be confused with core inflation, although there was a debate on that. Under the supervision of Frank Elderson, that provoked a very lively debate, not least because discretionary spending is done disproportionately by the rich, a 4 words letter that Ajay Banga told us we shouldn't use anymore. Our first panel on Tuesday was focused on heterogeneity and on the implications for monetary policy transmission of different economic structures in euro area countries, brilliantly shared by Isabel Schnabel. And of course, we had an engaging and high-powered policy panel with Jay Powell, Andrew Bailey, Kazuo Ueda, and Ri Chong Young, which I hope I also contributed to a little bit, but I can assure you that all participants who have had to leave earlier have said that they have enjoyed it tremendously, as I hope you did. I would also like to thank, of course, the Young Economist finalists, because not only do you all look fantastic with your diplomas, but you gave us those really sharp, acute, and very bright and quick presentation of the work that you do, and that is a real challenge. This morning, we kicked off the second day of the forum with a paper on non-bank financial intermediaries and the extent to which this wide variety of various animals might be able to contribute more to European growth, as well as the risk to financial stability. We followed up with a paper and discussion on trade, the buzzword of 2025, not to be confused with tariffs, and what the changing structure of global trade means for Europe, shared by Piero Cipollone. And today's panel discussed the challenges of central bank communication, or as Philip Lane noted, channeling Ben Bernanke, whether it is a 2% action and 98% talk or something else. The view from central banking, academia, and journalism taught us about the pros and cons of scenarios, the need to target different audiences with consistent messaging, and the relevance and limitation of artificial intelligence. And we have just ended with this mix of Philip's passion and enthusiasm, together with Lars' pragmatism and focus on what will it take. So I could not conclude without thanking all of you, the moderators who have done a fantastic job harnessing the talent of the participants, and all of you who have asked questions, and those of you who have not asked questions, because you have clearly paid attention to the last hour of this great conference that I would like to mention will be held next year from June 29 to July 1st. And that will save us having to have the policy panel on the first day, because what we did this time around was to allow some of our American colleagues to return to Washington for their July 4th big celebration, is we had the policy panel on the first day. Next year, we will have it on the second day, and that will be in line with the tradition that we have had. I'm not going to say more at this point in time. I would simply note for the record that the organizers of this conference, under the leadership of Isabel Schnabel, Luc Leven, and Philip Hartzman, have managed to almost bring this participation to absolute parity. 11 women, 14 men, between the moderators and the participants, whether on panels or otherwise, is actually something that very few economic conferences managed to deliver. So to them, thank you so much, and thank you for the fantastic work that you've done assembling all these smart people together. Thank you, and see you next year.